What if I told you that one of America's most famous World War II bombers was more likely to kill its own crew than the enemy was? The B-24 Liberator had one of the highest casualty rates of any Allied bomber in World War II. What most people don't realize is that flying in a Liberator wasn't just dangerous because of enemy fighters or anti-aircraft guns. The aircraft itself was a death trap in ways that would shock you. From structural failures at 25,000 feet to crew members being literally torn apart by their own plane, the B-24 Liberator subjected its crews to horrors that went far beyond what any pilot signed up for. By the end of the war, over 55,000 B-24 crewmen had been killed or reported missing in action. Today, you're going to learn exactly why this bomber earned its terrifying reputation, and why many crews would rather face a court-martial than climb aboard one again. Flying at 25,000 feet in a B-24 wasn't like flying in a modern airliner. Temperatures inside the aircraft regularly dropped to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine trying to operate machine guns, navigate, or drop bombs accurately when your hands are so cold you can't feel your fingers, even through thick gloves. Frostbite was a constant threat. Tail gunners, isolated in the rear of the aircraft, suffered the worst. Many returned from missions with blackened fingers and toes that had to be amputated. Some crew members froze to their gun positions and had to be cut free when the plane landed. The heating system was inadequate, and any damage to the aircraft often made it completely useless. But the cold was just the beginning of their problems. The B-24 was built for range and payload, not survivability. Its wings were thin and long, designed for fuel efficiency, but this made them incredibly vulnerable to combat damage. Unlike the B-17 Flying Fortress, which could absorb tremendous punishment and still make it home, the B-24 would often break apart in mid-air after taking hits. The wing structure was particularly weak where it connected to the fuselage. Under heavy G-forces during evasive maneuvers or when hit by flak, the wings would sometimes snap clean off. Imagine being at 25,000 feet when your aircraft suddenly breaks in half. There was no time to bail out, no time to say goodbye. Crews would simply fall to earth trapped inside the wreckage of their own plane. The bomb bay doors were another deadly flaw. They were designed to roll up into the sides of the aircraft, but the mechanism was prone to jamming. When this happened during combat, crews faced an impossible choice: return to base with a full bomb load and risk exploding on landing, or try to force the doors open manually while under enemy fire. Many chose to ram the doors open with crowbars or even their own bodies, often with fatal results. The numbers tell the real story. Out of 18,400 B-24s built, over 5,000 were lost in combat. That's 1 in every 4 aircraft. The average crew member survived just 11 missions out of the required 25. But here's the most shocking statistic: 26% of B-24 crew deaths weren't caused by enemy fire. They were killed by their own aircraft's design flaws. The plane was literally as dangerous to its crew as it was to the enemy. But here's a question that will make you think. If you knew there was a 26% chance your own aircraft would kill you before the enemy even got a shot, would you still climb aboard? The oxygen system on the B-24 was a nightmare waiting to happen. The lines were made of rubber that became brittle in extreme cold. When these lines cracked or were severed by flak, crew members would slowly suffocate without realizing what was happening. Oxygen deprivation at high altitude doesn't feel like drowning. Instead, it causes euphoria and confusion. Crew members would become disoriented, remove their masks, thinking they were fine, and then collapse. Tail gunners were found dead at their positions, sometimes still smiling, having died from hypoxia without ever realizing they were in danger. The centralized oxygen system meant that one piece of shrapnel could knock out breathing for the entire crew. Unlike later aircraft that had individual oxygen bottles for each position, the B-24 relied on a single supply line. When that line was cut, the entire crew had maybe 3 to 4 minutes of useful consciousness before they would start making fatal mistakes. Nothing terrified B-24 crews more than fire. The aircraft carried over 2,700 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel spread across multiple tanks throughout the wings and fuselage. A single tracer round, or piece of hot flak, could turn the entire aircraft into a fireball in seconds. The fuel tanks weren't self-sealing in early models, which meant any puncture would cause fuel to spray throughout the aircraft. The electrical systems weren't properly shielded, so sparks were common. When fuel vapor mixed with electrical sparks, the results were catastrophic. Crew members described the terror of smelling gasoline fumes during combat, knowing that at any moment their aircraft could explode. Some missions had entire squadrons catch fire simultaneously when attacked by fighters using incendiary ammunition. Pilots would watch their wingmen disappear in balls of flame, knowing they could be next. Even worse, the emergency exits were poorly designed. The main hatch was small and located in an awkward position. In an emergency, crew members would often jam up trying to escape, blocking the exit for everyone else. Many burned to death just feet from safety. The mental strain on B-24 crews was enormous. Unlike ground troops who could dig in or take cover, bomber crews were trapped in a metal tube at 25,000 feet with nowhere to hide. They had to fly straight and level during bomb runs, making them perfect targets for anti-aircraft guns below. The noise inside the aircraft was deafening. 4 massive Pratt & Whitney R1800 engines created a constant roar that made communication nearly impossible. Add to that the sound of machine guns firing, wind howling through holes in the fuselage, and the crash of exploding flak shells, and you have a sensory nightmare that lasted for hours at a time. Many crew members developed what would now be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it, quote, operational fatigue, unquote, or, quote, flak, happy unquote, back then. Symptoms included shaking hands, inability to sleep, and complete emotional breakdowns. Some crew members refused to fly after witnessing their friends die in particularly horrible ways. The waist gunners on a B-24 faced unique horrors. They stood at open windows on both sides of the aircraft, exposed to wind, cold, and enemy fire. Their positions offered no armor protection, and they were often the first casualties when the aircraft was attacked. During combat, spent shell casings from their own guns would rain down inside the aircraft, creating an ankle-deep carpet of hot brass that crew members had to wade through. The casings were scalding hot and could cause serious burns if they got inside clothing or boots. Worse still, the waist gunners were positioned directly behind the bomb bay. When bombs were released, the sudden change in the aircraft's center of gravity would cause violent pitching motions. Gunners were sometimes thrown against the aircraft walls with enough force to break bones or knock them unconscious. One of the most infamous B-24 missions was the raid on the oil refineries at Ploiești, Romania on August 1, 1943. Of the 178 Liberators that took off that morning, only 33 returned undamaged. 54 aircraft were shot down, and many others crash-landed or were so badly damaged they never flew again. The horror stories from that mission became legendary. Aircraft flew so low they were hitting telephone poles and treetops. Crews watched their planes ahead explode in massive fireballs as they flew directly through the smoke and debris. Some bombers collided with each other in the confusion, killing everyone aboard both aircraft instantly. One crew reported flying through a cloud of blood and aircraft parts when the B-24 ahead of them took a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire. The debris crashed through their windscreen, covering the pilots and the remains of their fellow airmen. They still had to continue the mission and drop their bombs on target. The B-24 Liberator was built to win a war, not to keep its crews safe. Over 18,000 of these aircraft were produced, more than any other American combat aircraft in history. But behind those production numbers lies a darker truth. The men who flew them paid a terrible price. Which World War II aircraft do you think had the deadliest reputation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe and the bell, there's more to uncover. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.